returns. But now let's move to the most interesting part, to actually filling in the VAT declaration in the Netherlands. You can see that the language is the Dutch one, but I made some comments. So here, the first 1A item is the line where you state the amount of the services, in my case, the legal services which are rendered to Dutch residents in the 3 months in the second quarter. You state here the amount net of the VAT, and on the right side you state the VAT, the standard rate, which goes on top. Then the second point, 1B, you need to do the same. So also what you render to the Dutch residents, terms of services, but with a lower 9% rate. Here I copied the usual items of goods and services which are subject to the lower 9% rate. So you should check yourself whether you're subject to the lower or the standard rate. Item 1C presupposes that there is also a zero rate, but in practice it is very rare. Then the more interesting item 1D, it relates to the private use. When we talked about taxable and non-taxable supplies, I mentioned that when your supply is non-taxable, you cannot deduct VAT which was charged to you by your suppliers. The same problem arises when you use a good or a service which is supplied to you not only for taxable purposes but also for private use. For example, you use a computer, a mobile network, Wi-Fi, not only for work but also for leisure. In these cases, generally you need to apportion each and every supply which was rendered to you between the private use and the use for the account of your taxable services. And this apportionment you do several times. First is at the time when you buy the good or service, you make a calculation just based on your expectations. What would be the percentage of private use, for example, 50-50. And then you apply only the 50% of the amount of VAT charged to you, and you include it into the declaration. But this section 1D is used only with the last return after the fourth quarter, where based on your factual situation during the year, you say, okay, when I bought the service or good, I used the 50-50 formula, but now I understand that actually only 25% of the service or good was used for my private needs. In this case, I can't, in this section, use the final 25% portion, and I can increase the amount of VAT which would be deductible from my VAT which I need to pay to the tax authority. So this is an important one. And now we move to the last item in the first section, in the section which relates to domestic taxable supplies. And It is also very rarely used when we talk about taxable services item. It relates only to zero-rated supplies or the supplies where a reverse charge is used, meaning that you don't impose, you don't charge VAT, but you transfer the obligation to charge the VAT to your client. But don't confuse this point with the further sections where you have to account for the reverse charge from the European member states, because this section specifically excludes these events. Then the second section is also rarely used. It's also limited to domestic situations where your Dutch supplier, so I'm Dutch, and my Dutch supplier indicated in the invoice that he will not charge VAT, but the VAT is reverse charged to me. In this case, if he has such an entitlement, so if this invoice was correctly filled in, then I have to put the VAT and charge it myself and put it into this section, but this is again more of an exception than a rule. Section 3 relates to services which you render to, so section 3b European and section 3a non-European countries. In both cases, since these are B2B services, you don't charge VAT. In the case of the EU member states, you have to do the following. You have to, first of all, indicate the VAT number of your client in the invoice and verify the client's VAT number with the European VAT number validation system. After you do that, basically your client is recognized as a business for tax purposes, and you can not charge VAT and reverse charge this VAT to the client, so that the client would have to account for it in his or her declaration. What is also important and which can be missed by taxpayers is that in addition to the VAT return, if they provide B2B services to European countries, then together with the VAT return, they have to file the so-called recapitulative statement, or in Dutch, opgave ICP, which basically states where you have to state the country of your client, the VAT number, and the amount of taxable supply which was made to this particular taxable person. And the deadlines for filing this report are the same as for the VAT return, so by the end of the month following the taxable quarter. And if you do all that, here it's quite easy to fill in this section where you, in my case, all of my supplies were to third countries, and in third countries it's better also to ensure that the client has a VAT number, because the local rules may also otherwise require you to register locally. So if the client in the EU doesn't have a VAT number, doesn't provide you with one, then you have to charge, in my case, Dutch VAT, 21%, because you have to regard this client as a customer, not business. And if the supply exceeds the threshold, like 10,000 euros, then you have to register for VAT purposes locally with the client's member state or use the one-stop shop, which I previously mentioned. That's why it's very important to ensure that the client has the valid VAT number. We move to the section where the services or the goods and supplies are provided to us. This is a very important section because it also means that we have to account for reverse charge for services which were rendered to us from other EU member states. In my case, I also did that. You can see here the numbers. So one situation, for example, I have an Amazon account. I register there as a business, and I file my VAT number. And after that, my suppliers can make supplies to me without charging the VAT. And in the invoice, they mentioned that the VAT is reverse charged to me, and based on that, I don't pay extra on these supplies, and I have to include these supplies into this declaration, into this part. So basically, when the reverse charge applies, I can deduct the same amount which I have to declare, and I don't incur any negative VAT tax consequences as a result of that. This number already contains the supplies which were reflected at this stage, and the end result we have by this number together with the VAT which I charged on my domestic supplies, so 194, being subtracted from all of the VAT which was charged to me or reverse charged to me by my suppliers, and I have negative result, meaning that I will receive a refund of 54 euros. But imagine that you not only provide taxable services, you have like multi-chain businesses where some of the services you provide are not taxable. For example, financial services or educational services or some sports-related services. In this case, you would have to apportion the supplies made to you between the taxable and non-taxable services. In the tax declaration, you only include the already apportioned decreased amount of the supply made to you. But as long as all of your supplies are taxable, all of your supplies are not for private use, then you can use these supplies and VAT charged on you to deduct from the VAT you charge on your services. But there are some exceptions, and these are quite important. You cannot include in this section the VAT which, for example, you incur while being hosted in a hotel and paying for the hotel or paying for the restaurant while attending a conference, for example, related to your business. In this situation, a specific rule applies that even though you can deduct this cost from your income tax base, you cannot deduct the VAT charged to you from your VAT tax base.